Okay, everybody, welcome to this edition of the O'Hara News and Editorial. It is April 7th, 2015, and we have a special guest tonight, David Pisara, who is a attorney in Los Angeles, California, and he practices at a law firm, Pisara and Gerst, which specializes in men's family law, and the name of the law firm is, in fact, Men's Family Law, or maybe that's just the blog. Maybe David's joining us right now, so maybe you can clarify that right now. But he's joining us from LA tonight, and we're very happy to have him on. David, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. You recently, in the past several years, there's been a burgeoning industry in the area of law that deals specifically with men and divorce, specifically divorce and family law, but also there is a growing, from what I've seen, and perhaps what you can expand on this, from what I've seen, a growing awareness, finally, after a long time of what many here in the men's rights movement would consider real severe disadvantages for men when it comes to not just family law, but also the criminal, but also our criminal justice system. When it comes to men, we're really at a disadvantage in many areas regarding false accusations of sexual assault and sexual harassment in the workplace, domestic violence, as well as custody, family law custody disputes, and of course alimony, lifelong alimony. A very long time. For a very long time that's been considered true discrimination against men, as well as child support and a lot of other things. But there seems to have been a growth in the demand for this type of legal service. How did you get involved in this? And if you could kind of give us your take on the background of the burgeoning industry of men's law services.
Absolutely. My practice has evolved. When I started practice, we were a general practice that accepted both men and women, and we still accept both men and women.
Uh-huh.
But our marketing was to everybody. And what I found was I was burning out after about 5 years, and I made a list of the clients I liked and the clients that were driving me absolutely crazy, and it was really clear. It was men on the left and girls on the right,
Uh-huh.
and the women were just driving me nuts. And what I found when I'm working with men is, A, they generally don't understand what their rights are. B, they don't really have the emotional fortitude to really press through and fight for themselves. And C, dealing with a man is a very different prospect than dealing with a woman, particularly in the emotionally fraught areas of family law and custody, and when we reach into domestic violence areas. So about 10 years ago, I decided that it was time to really focus more on men and men's rights, and that was the birth of mensfamilylaw.com. And as a consequence of that, we have, over the last 10 years, really honed our skills when it comes to representing men and understanding not just what their rights are, because frankly the law is for the most part very gender neutral.
Uh-huh.
It's the emotional impact and coaching a man through a divorce, or whether it's a temporary restraining order to get his kids back, or it's a domestic violence issue and some kind of quasi-criminal case that we're fighting. Those skills are what we bring that I feel most other lawyers don't bring, because we're focused on what a man needs, and sometimes a man needs a coach who's going to be there and put his arm around his shoulder and walk through the courtroom doors, and other times he needs a real bulldog to get in there and fight for his rights. And sometimes, frankly, they sit in my office and they just need a shoulder to cry on and let their emotions out. Because when you take a man and he's been a primary provider for his family, and you kick him out of his house with a temporary restraining order, and you alienate him from his kids for 3 weeks immediately, and the next thing that happens is he's told that he's a child molester, and now he's got to have supervised visitation after he goes through some stupid psychological evaluation from some underpaid, ill-educated social worker who doesn't really know their job but has a lot of biases that, well, moms are just better parents, period, because they have the boobies. It comes to a point of needing to emotionally support them as much as it is legally support them. And what we provide is that sort of all-around service that allows a man to get those emotions out, and then he's ready to now go do what he has to do. And for a man, generally, what we have found is that we have to change their mindset towards their spouse. Because oftentimes what I find is that even in the middle of a divorce where their kids have been taken from them and they're kicked out of their house and they're literally living in their truck, they still have that mindset that it's my job to be the provider, it's my job to be the prince, it's my job to be the knight in shining armor on a white horse, and I'm going to fall on my sword because it's better for the kids and it's my job. And I have to disabuse them of that idea and get them into a reality of, no, you're actually in an adversarial relationship now with your ex, and when it comes to custody of your kids, you need to be taking that very seriously. And that's one of the reasons why I think you're seeing a growth in this industry is more and more men are recognizing that they can be just as good parents, and frankly, they want to be just as good parents, and more importantly, just as involved. I'm part of a men's group, and we have about, I don't know, any given day, somewhere between 40 and 80 guys show up, and there's usually about 4 to 6 guys who are now stay-at-home dads. And that didn't used to happen 15 years ago. There would be none in the room. But what I've noticed is, of those 4 or 6 guys who are stay-at-home dads, there's a large percentage of the rest of the room that views them not with condescension, not with smirks and laughter, but with envy and jealousy, because they want to be the stay-at-home dads too. And that's what I think is what's driving a lot of this change in the legal marketplace, where you're seeing more and more lawyers are focusing on dads because dads are demanding it.
Let's talk about, I do want to kind of expand on where men are at emotionally when they're going through a divorce, when they've had a restraining order placed on them, when they've been falsely accused of domestic violence or child abuse, as well as the overall nature financially that men find themselves in when they find themselves in this process. And it's always unexpected, always blindsides them. That's been my experience. I'm sure yours as well. A guy one day will think everything is hunky-dory with his marriage, and the next day he finds himself in jail. And what I've seen in my own personal life, when I see men going through this situation, and I've seen it dozens of times. Every man has. I'm 43 years old. I've seen this happen to dozens of friends. And it seems that aside from having been conditioned to be the provider and the strong one, the one that's going to be the stable, moderating factor in a bad situation that men are conditioned to be from the time they're little children, really, there's also this emotional need to think that somehow they can still make it work out with their ex, that somehow, or at the very least, that she's going to be fair, that
Right. Right.
this woman we got married, we fell in love, we got married, we had kids together. How could she possibly want to ruin my life unless there was something else going on that I could fix? But what I've seen is that these guys are just kidding themselves. It's when you say adversarial relationship, it's more than just a legal theory you're dealing with. Oftentimes you have to really tell these guys, hey, this woman is not the woman you married. She right now is your mortal enemy, and you have to think about her this way because she is going through all the motions here. And you have to rethink your relationship with this person. You have to rethink everything that you have learned about, as a man, about what it means to be a man in many ways.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I frequently have to explain to men that the women you married has changed radically, and that their attitude is now, these are my kids, your job is to pay for them, you'll get to see them on the weekends.
Only when I want you to see them, basically, is what comes down to it.
Yes, exactly. Because it's very much an ownership model of the children. They're not viewing them as these are individuals that need to be co-parented. They're viewing them as personal property, the same way you would view a car or a table. It's horrific because the men, frankly, and from my perspective, I think men are actually far more generous than women. I think the woman generally is more selfish when it comes to the children, and the man is far more generous in terms of giving up time, being willing to pay money, being willing to make sacrifices for his children and his family. Whereas
This
most
works
women,
against him legally. This really does. It's something that's used in a cynical way against him in a court of law. Don't you think?
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely, and it's not even so much the court of law as it's the court of negotiating with a terrorist, and the terrorist happens to be the mother of the children.
Right.
That's the problem. And guys have this attitude often that, well, if I'm reasonable, she'll be reasonable. And
But
this
it's
is where
not the way.
we're trained as men, because this is the whole concept of like male privilege of, you're trained from a very beginning of your life how to act as a man. And frankly, it's true. And I have said over and over again, give me any two men and a pizza and a six-pack of beer, and they could figure out how to raise a kid over the next 18 years. Because we're reasonable. We're going to sit down, we're going to say, I want this, you want that, fine, we're going to come to a middle ground, and we're going to call it a day. But when you're dealing with a woman, that's not the way it works, because from their perspective, these are her kids, she's the better parent, she's the better nurturer, you're just this doofus whose sperm got donated, and your job is pay.
Okay, great segue to the next point. You said the word pay. Here's the thing when it comes to legal services, they cost money. And we have a family law system that is designed to literally take money away from men and give it to women during custody disputes and alimony cases. So you as a lawyer, obviously it is more lucrative to represent women. But
Profoundly more lucrative.
but you're
Profoundly.
representing men here, so that has to be a discouragement for you. So there has to be something other than just the financial reward of rewarding men. And also, if you could, I mean, as a men's rights activist, as someone who's concerned with the men's rights movement, I've always said that one of the biggest crippling factors of the men's rights movement, especially the fathers' rights movement, is that we're dealing with people who are financially crippled. So we can't get donations to raise public awareness. We can't, because you need money to change laws. You need money to raise public awareness. And the people who are affected the most by this are the people who are most financially crippled people in our society. I mean, some men go homeless.
Absolutely, on a regular basis, and
So
there's nothing to help them. There's no men's shelter when they're in an abusive relationship to run to take their kids. When you ask, why do I represent men when it's far more lucrative to represent women? The reality is that the emotion of dealing with a man and getting him just a decent, not a fantastic, but just a decent settlement is really the big payoff for me. The money is nice, but frankly, there's not nearly enough of it for the emotional agita of dealing with this stuff. There's got to be something else. And it's when I walk out of court and I have a dad who is happy with being able to have 50% custody of his kids,
right.
that's worth a lot. And frankly, those wins don't come as often as I'd like.
Sure.
And it's not because the court won't do it. It's often because the man sabotages himself.
Right.
He won't make the sacrifices that are necessary. He won't fight hard enough. He's not willing to say the things that he needs to say. He's not willing to make the changes that are required to get that 50%. I mean, I've had guys come into my office and they say, yeah, I want 50%. I moved out of the house and I want my 50% custody of the kids. I'm like, okay, great. What's your work schedule? Well, I work 7 to 7. Okay, this is going to be difficult. How close do you live to where mom and the kids live? Well, they're 45 miles away. I'm like, dude, what are you thinking? There's no way you're going to get any kind of near custody close to 50% with that kind of schedule. You can't be at work 12 hours a day and have the kids be in a car at least an hour to come see you. So you've got to change your job, go move closer to where mom is so that you can actually have the time and be close enough in proximity so that the kids aren't spending the majority of their life and free time in a car commuting, because no judge is going to order that.
What are the biggest mistakes you see besides what you just described, and besides the mindset? If there were some basic mistakes, like let's say for instance, three basic mistakes that most men make that really get them in trouble when it comes to we'll just talk about custody disputes now. Just custody and what they can do to get more equitable custody, and as such, having gotten more equitable custody, not having to pay out the nose for child support, which they can't afford, and there's the basic problem. You're paying to this money to this individual who has no accountability as to how it's spent, and supposedly it's for the children, and you don't even get to see your children or see how they're doing or whatnot. And that's this huge philosophical problem with the child support system. But anyway, we can talk about that later. What are the three biggest mistakes you see men make besides the ones that you just talked about? Moving away, leaving the house. Do you think that actually, when a divorce starts, or if a guy wants to, let's start with a guy who wants to initiate a divorce, and then we'll talk about a guy whose wife initiated divorce. What are the three biggest mistakes you see men make who are initiating divorces as far as child custody is concerned?
Leaving the house too early, before
Okay.
you've got something in writing, is a huge issue. You've got to have something in writing that says what you're going to do. Filing for divorce and leaving the house without a strategy for how you're going to work out a custody plan. Like I said, having a plan for where you're going to relocate. What's your life going to look like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months down the road? And probably the other biggest mistake that I see is, and it's a hard one for me to explain to people, because it's a strategic thing that they've done, and it's taken place over years. They've created a culture in their marriage, in their family, that it's okay for mom not to work. And you've got to remember that a woman plans a divorce generally for about 2 years. In
Before
my
the guy even
experience,
knows about it, before the man's even aware that there's a problem.
absolutely.
Okay.
And more importantly, he's been defrauded for those 2 years because she's playing a psychological game to keep him thinking everything is okay. I can't tell you how many men I have that I've represented over the years that have said to me, I don't understand why this is happening to me. And I'm like, well, let me ask you a question. How often were you having sex? And he'd be like, most married couples,
Yeah,
once
it's
maybe
always a
every
big
2
thing.
months or once every 3 months. And I'm like, dude, that wasn't sex. That was buying her time.
Right.
That was buying your complacency in a bad relationship to stick it out for the kids, and all she's doing is setting you up. It's the setup that happens that men are not, they're not paying attention to their financial status in a relationship, and they're not paying attention to what's really going on. If you've got a woman who's got a kid who's in school, there's no reason why she doesn't have a job. In today's workplace, she should be working, period.
Right.
If the kid's in school, go get a part-time job. I don't care. You've got to earn something. You have to be contributing. Secondly, do not ever let her take full control of the finances. Any man that just hands his paycheck over to his wife is setting himself up to just get gutted.
I see
Because
this a
here's what
lot.
she's going to do. She's going to pay off all of her credit card debt. So she leaves a divorce debt-free. She's going to rack up your credit card debt and make minimum payments so that it just looks like it looks like she's being financially responsible and on your credit cards, and maybe she's occasionally paying your student loans. And what that does is when she leaves the relationship, she's now got a good credit score. Now, yes, legally she's still responsible for half of your credit card debt, but the reality is it's in your name. If she doesn't pay it, she's like, well, tough, you got to pay it. So it's easier for her to play hardball because she's already positioned herself to A, leave in a good position, B, she's probably squirreled away in hidden money, and C, she's now got you on the hook for earning a very high wage and her earning nothing. So because you haven't asserted yourself in the relationship to demand that she become at least some part of a contributing party of this, you're setting yourself up. If you're not paying attention to what's happening to your finances, you're setting yourself up. If you're just abdicating all your responsibility, you're gonna get gutted. I guarantee it. I've yet to see it not happen.
Okay, so we have the leaving the home too early for men who are initiating divorces, men who are leaving the home too early, men who give financial control over to their wives. What's the third biggest mistake that men make, who are the ones who are initiating the divorce?
No exit strategy for what it's going to look like 6 months, 9 months down the road.
I see. No long-term vision of what's going to happen, or caution about the possibility that she could falsely accuse you, or that she might mount a, a battle, a legal battle with you, and may have already spoken to every single lawyer in town, putting you at a disadvantage. Would you say that's another big one?
In a small town, that probably is. In a bigger town, not so much. It just gets
Okay.
too expensive.
Right.
Um, but she might talk to the top 3 lawyers in town and put them on retainer,
Right.
just enough, like, kind of spoil the whole pool.
Right.
But the biggest one is, if you're going to plan a divorce, plan it. Don't just plan it and be like, Monday morning, I'm going to get a divorce and file on Wednesday. Talk to a lawyer on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and strategize yourself. Like I say in my book, A Man's Guide to Divorce Strategy, it requires a strategy. You wouldn't go into a football game with no strategy. Don't go into a divorce with no strategy.
Right. And I also want to reiterate, what you said before about problems in the relationship, especially sex. If you're only having sex once every 2 months, she's just buying time.
Totally.
And that's a big. And I know men right now who are in marriages where they're lucky if they have sex every 2 or 3 months. And there's this one guy in particular, and I try to tell him, I say, listen, your marriage is on the rocks. You need to get a divorce now, because as far as she is concerned, she's no longer married to you, and he doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't want to hear it. And it's always like, whether it's the same thing. Oh, but we have a kid together, and I have to be this guy. I have to be a dad. I have to do the right thing. I'm like, you're not doing the right thing.
She's the mother of my babies.
Yeah, exactly.
I so hate that phrase.
It's like,
because what that phrase means to me is you have been cut off and you are just dead. You're going to get just hammered. It's horrible. Let's face it. In reality, if you're only having sex with somebody every 2 or 3 months in a relationship, it's not going to be that good to begin with.
No,
because you don't have any communication going on. It's probably not a whole lot more than mutual masturbation at best. And it's going to be very short and unsatisfying. And that ought to be like a giant hallmark that there's something really wrong here.
Let's talk about men who are blindsided by divorce papers. Or let's take it to the extreme. Let's talk about men who have been hit with a false accusation of domestic violence.
Okay, so that's divorce by ambush is what I call it.
Right.
In a state like California and most of the states across the country, you do a domestic violence restraining order, which is based on her allegations of alleging that something happened, and it's under penalty of perjury, so supposedly it's true. And a judge will not take testimony 90% of the time, and 90% of the time they're going to just rubber stamp whatever is on the paperwork. And properly drafted, a domestic violence restraining order kicks you out of your house, takes custody of the kids, makes you pay the mortgage or the rent, makes you pay child support, takes control of the dog, takes control of all of the assets in the home, and you are probably going to be faced with having to go to a batterer's intervention program, which is usually a 52-week course telling you why you suffer from male privilege and how bad you are because you have a testicle. And then the next thing that's going to happen is an anger management course, because, again, through male privilege, you understand that you can just get angry and suffer no consequences, which is basically a bunch of BS. That's usually a 13-week program, there's anger management. And when you're done paying for the batterers intervention program and the anger management program, in
How
order
much
to
do those
get
cost, by the way? How much the batters intervention program, the anger management program? How much does that cost?
depending on where you go, usually they're like between 20 and $50 a session
Okay,
is
and
what they're going to
is a
charge.
session a week, and it's for 13 weeks, right?
Well, it's 13 weeks for anger management usually, and that's going to be the higher end of the scale. You know,
Uh-huh.
50 bucks a pop.
Mhm.
You know, the lower end of the scale is when we're going to get into the batterers intervention program because they know they've got you for 52 weeks. So it's going to end up costing you more money because you're going to go longer, but the individual sessions are cheaper. But you have to do both of them. And then you're probably also going to have, if she really wants to go nuclear on you, you're probably also going to hire a supervisor for when you want visitation, not co-parenting time, but visitation with your kid, so that you can spend 4 hours on a Saturday in a park with some person who's been moderately trained, meaning they've taken a 4-hour course on what they're supposed to be observing. They'll take notes of how you interact with your children or child, and they will cost anywhere from $50 to $125 per hour.
Wow.
So it could conceivably cost you $500 to see your kid for 4 hours on a Saturday in a park where somebody is watching your every move.
So the thing is like it's one giant money making scam where the system itself, at the behest of the mother, is holding the children hostage, and they're collecting money from this. And this is a huge money making scheme.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you think about all the guys who are separated from their children, and think about the millions, billions of dollars being made by separating fathers from their children, you
Oh,
see
no doubt.
how corrupt the whole thing is.
No doubt. Absolutely. And it's mostly BS. In 15 years of practice, I've had, I don't know, 1,000 cases where domestic violence has been alleged, and most of those these days are now having child molesting thrown in there just for fun,
Uh-huh.
which then involves Department of Child and Family Services.
Yeah, that's
So
what it
now
gets.
we've got the underpaid, ill-educated, hyper biased social worker who is doing a piss poor job making a determination as to whether or not you molested your kid. And generally the molestation falls into two main categories. If there's a little girl involved, and by little I mean usually probably still in diapers, the allegation usually falls along the lines of mom, quote unquote, has fears that dad might be, and I apologize for the language, but fingering the little girl.
Right.
That I see that on a regular basis in these domestic violence applications.
And this is, pardon me for interrupting, but like these are accusations that are almost impossible to disprove. Almost always, right? And the guy's almost, well, because of the way things are, he's guilty until proven innocent because of just the mentality surrounding the whole child accusation thing. So when you see an
Absolutely.
accusation like that, I saw my husband touching our little girl
Right. And this
inappropriately.
is where you have to have
How's someone going to defend themselves from an accusation like that? They can't. But
well,
there's
this is where you really have to have a skilled lawyer come in to start breaking things down. When you say touching, and you're right, that's exactly the language that's used. It's usually extremely generic language, very vague. Really, when you look at these, what's mom's issue? She has fears. That's what it really boils down to. It's never, I saw him actually doing something. It's always couched in terms of, I have fears, I'm afraid, I'm worried that. And the reason why they do that is it's enough to raise the red flag that a judge is going to immediately issue the restraining order, immediately take you away from your kids, immediately require supervised visitation. But when it proves false, which, as I was saying, in my 15 years, I've had literally one case where I actually had doubts myself as to whether or not the guy was guilty. He just, we had a personality clash and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He spent a year fighting in DCFS to prove his innocence. he maintained he was innocent from start to finish, and they came back and said, absolutely not. Mom's the guilty party. Mom's the one that's planting ideas. Mom's the one that's the problem here. He's fine. It's just unbelievable to me what happens, because a judge looking at this says, well, if mom's got fears, I don't want to be the judge that actually didn't issue the restraining order.
Right.
So to protect the kid, I'm gonna issue it. And then mom's big out is, well, I didn't say he actually did it. I just said I had fears that he might be. And that's how mom gets away from the whole libel, slander,
Right.
actual making false allegations, because
Right.
it's never actually he did something. It's always, I'm afraid that he is or he might. And
Right. Because there's no concrete accusation there that she could be held accountable for. So she has an out, and there's really no way you can hold someone accountable for something their feelings.
Dude, I have fears that, Russia's going to bomb Los Angeles with a nuclear bomb. What is that worth? Absolutely nothing.
Right.
But that's the big hook that allows them to get away from the real bad part of family law, where you could actually go after somebody for false allegations, but they never make false allegations.
Okay, let's talk about domestic violence. Let's talk about the Violence Against Women Act. Yeah, I know. I used to do, just to give you some background on myself, I used to do lobbying on Capitol Hill with SAVE, and I had quite an extensive education about the Violence Against Women Act from Ed Bartlett, and I found the experience, I did for a couple of years, I found the experience to be very interesting. The politics surrounding it are very interesting, but the law itself is abhorrent for anybody who has any kind of appreciation for due process or fairness. The Violence Against Women Act is an abomination. But since it deals with violence against women and not violence against men, it has this rubber stamp put on it, where it doesn't matter, as long as we're doing something ostensibly to protect women from these big bad meanies that are trying to hurt them all the time. We can do anything we want to men as a sex because of this patriarchal power structure in which all men keep all women down through domestic violence. And that is literally the theory on which the Violence Against Women Act is built.
And I think you're 100% right in most of that. It's just that we have modified the language to some degree to make it, in theory, more gender neutral in the language of the act itself. Certainly not in the title, but in the language of the act itself.
That was the last
freedom. The latest iteration where it's, in theory, adding in the LGBT community and the Native American community
and the gay community. And it always seems to come up where whenever the language is gender neutral, it only comes up when it has to do with the LGBT community, specifically that community. But still, it's just not when I looked at the last renewal, which was 2 years ago, the language was so sparse, and the recognition of men as victims of domestic violence in that renewal it was like a couple of grains of sand on an entire beach, because it was a huge, the Violence Against Women Act, the actual text is just huge. It's like 1,500 pages long, and there's only just a handful of mentions of men as victims of domestic violence. It basically doesn't mean anything, and to me, that's them buying time.
It's entirely them buying time, but it's also a factor of men falling on their sword when they should, in fact, be picking up their sword. It's men thinking, well, it wasn't really that bad. Well, I don't care if it was that bad. You've got to understand something. There's a whole cycle that happens, and that a man is a victim, and I hate using the word victim, but that's what it is. Generally we use the word target or survivor when we're dealing with men. But I want to drive the point home, because the victim mentality is what's been driving the Violence Against Women Act so far afield.
Right.
A man is a victim when a woman starts berating him, on a regular basis,
Right.
when she starts slapping him,
Right.
when she starts hitting him, when she starts withholding sex, when she starts using sex as a way to control the relationship, when she starts saying, well, I'm better with money, so give me the paycheck and I'll make sure the bills are paid, that's financial abuse. These are all ways in which men are being abused, but they don't see it that way. And until we start getting a change in the consciousness of men of what really constitutes abuse under the current language, we're not going to see any real big changes. I am often, when I get into these arguments with women, I'm often told, well, a man should be able to take a hit from a woman. He's bigger. Well,
Right.
I don't buy that as an argument. Just because
Yeah.
I should be able to survive you hitting me doesn't mean you have the right to hit me.
Right. I know a lot of guys who are bigger than I am. If I smack them in the face, I should fully expect to be smacked back harder because I assaulted them. Plain and simple.
Completely. I don't know. I've never understood a man should never hit a woman mentality.
Right.
I agree that a man should never hit a woman first, but that's because I don't think a man should hit anybody first, because I don't think violence is
No
the
one
answer.
should ever hit anybody else. That's it. It's like,
right.
Duh.
When we get into the Violence Against Women Act and how it's been implemented and pushed so far afield, it's amazing to me the level of ignorance that people have. And I'll give you a real quick example. Basically the godmother of the giant sacrificial lamb that created the Violence Against Women Act was Nicole Brown Simpson. Everybody knows Nicole Brown Simpson.
Right.
27 stab wounds, almost beheaded. Now, when I say the name Travis Alexander, most people look at me and have this stupid look on their face like,
Who's
who?
that?
What? And I'm like, well, the guy. 27 stab wounds, almost beheaded, and a gunshot wound to the head. Victim of domestic violence. They're like, who? I'm like, Jodi Arias killed him? Oh, the psycho bitch.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a second. How come everybody knows Nicole Brown Simpson and nobody knows Travis Alexander? Isn't there just something really wrong with that? Because they're equal victims.
Well,
they were each killed.
Right. There's this, but there's this gynocentrism when it comes to intimate partner violence that has not been shaken yet. And
right,
I think
because they talk about it all the time, and men don't, because we're told we don't cry, we don't get afraid, bury your fears, minimize the damage, shake it off, get back on the field, and go play it out.
Right. But it's this it's that factor. It has been used in a cynical way to set up a multi-billion-dollar multinational industry that is supported by governments worldwide to, number one, extract a lot of money out of the population through tax dollars and also through these fundraising campaigns where it's like, hey, give us money. Yes. And all these people are getting beat up. All these women are getting beat up. They're not going to get beat up anymore. If you just give me $10, it's huge. And also that, but also to take away due process rights for men accused of these crimes. So there's a totalitarian aspect to it. There's an erosion of these principles of due process and the separation or this stopgap that we have between the state
and the individual. Absolutely. I mean,
and no one sees this.
The way in which we immediately terminate somebody's constitutional rights. Now, I'm not a big gun guy. I don't own guns. I don't have I've shot them. I don't particularly like them. Don't particularly hate them. But the fact is, we have a constitutional right under the Second Amendment to bear arms.
Right.
But under VAWA, as it's implemented through like the Domestic Violence Protection Act in California, the minute anybody makes an allegation, just an allegation,
your Second Amendment rights are taken
violence, boom, we're taking that gun away from you. And then on the hearing,
all of your guns.
If it's proven, all of my guns are going away. and it's permanent. That's essentially a
Forever,
permanent order.
even without a trial, that's permanent in California.
Yeah, you can have a
Is
permanent
that true in
restraining
every state?
order.
That's not true in every state, though.
I don't know if it's true in every state because I
I don't
can't
think
believe
it's true
Texas
even
would
in
allow
Colorado.
it, but
But that's crazy that it's permanent even after it's been proven that the allegations were false. That's
oh yeah,
insane.
because the allegations, you've got to remember this. In a civil court, the standard of proof is preponderance of the evidence, 50.1%. One level, all you got to do is put a feather on one side, that side wins.
Yeah,
So, and what that really means is, in reality,
yeah,
is whoever has the greater likelihood of being the victim, the judge is going to come down on their side because he's going to be
right,
he's going to cover his own butt, or she's going to cover her own butt,
right.
and give that side that little bit extra of credibility
Yeah,
because they don't want to be wrong.
yeah. The 105-pound female is going to win out over the 205-pound male in every case.
Well, not in every case because I had that case and I won.
Oh, okay.
And I won because my guy was smart enough to take pictures of his bloody face when she cut him. And I had that picture blown up, and I showed it to the judge, and I'm like, Your Honor, I know he is 6'5". I know he is 275 pounds. And I put him on the stand, and he said, I have to be a pacifist because I'm the biggest guy in the room, and I know if anything happens, I'm going to jail.
Right. And
And
you
I
put him
said,
on the
Your Honor,
stand.
she attacked him. And the judge just looked at me and said, Counsel, I have known several very large people in my life, and you are 100% correct.
Right.
Boom, I got my restraining order. I was a happy camper.
Hmm.
But if I didn't have that photo, I'm not sure I would have gotten it.
Let's talk about documentation. We live in an age now where personal recording devices are pretty much ubiquitous. Everyone has a smartphone. It's easy to record telephone calls, and um, we're starting to see more and more cases where men are accused of domestic violence and sexual assault and all kinds of things, and they're able to prove that, hey, this didn't happen. Let's take, for instance, the Hofstra rape case, where clearly these guys had a cell phone with them. They recorded what was going on, and this girl who had falsely accused them of a horrific crime was completely discredited. Two things going on here. First of all, there's this idea that you shouldn't. First of all, this idea that men have this naive, this dangerous naivete that says that, well, you really, I mean, why would you want to record any kind of dispute between you and your woman or some other woman? Because, you know, women never falsely accuse you of anything or anything like that. It's very rare. So why would you want to do that? Why would you want to make that this factor in your relationship, in your conversations with women or your interactions with women? And
Well, listen,
also,
they're doing it to you, so we can start there, just on grounds of equality.
right.
They're keeping everything. Every text message, every email, they keep. It's
Mhm.
the other big thing that men do is they dispose of that information
Right.
way too often. I
Right.
think it was the first episode of my podcast, or maybe the second, I say dads need to be recording artists.
Right.
And it's the same thing if you're in a relationship. You need to keep that stuff because if you're starting to see red flags,
You need to
it's
start.
gonna
Right,
grow into
especially
a
at the end of
big
a
flag.
relationship, and I've been this way for a while now. Every time I've been in, even like in the most casual of dating relationships, where they're ending and their text messages going back and forth, I make it a point to record every single one. Keep
Yeah,
it, keep it, keep it, keep it, keep it. It really
totally.
is. Yeah, and and this is not just dating relationships, but especially work relationships where I have disputes with female coworkers.
Oh, well, that's a whole other ball of wax. That
Yeah, and maybe we can talk about that a
but
little.
more to your point, if you look at like what happened in what was it 2013 with Megan Walter, the cheerleader for the what was she, the Arizona Cardinals,
Mhm.
when she attacks her boyfriend, he starts recording it. She's on the phone calling the police saying he's attacking me, and the cops come. They separate the parties, And if this guy didn't have video, he would have been going to jail.
Right.
Instead, because he had the video, she ended up going to jail.
Right.
I think it's crucial when these things happen for guys to learn to, like, start pulling out your phone, record this stuff. I don't care what you get. Just get something.
Yeah, let's talk about the legality of actually doing this now. Here in where I live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, it's a single party state, so I can record this conversation that we're having, and we are recording this conversation. It's Google Hangout, of course. But if I were to have a conversation with you over the phone, I could record it, and it's fair game for me to use. But
not all states are like that. California
and like how many? I mean, so like let's talk about the circumstances under which someone can submit this kind of evidence in a court of law, and which states allow it, which states don't. Are there states out there where, like, a guy who was accused of rape, who has been who has surreptitiously recorded the act, and it's been shown that the sexual act was consensual? Are there states out there where he can show this evidence, even though it's completely legit and the sex was consensual, and it shows it clearly on this video footage?
Here's where this stuff is really, really useful, is by having it, you never get to the evidence stage, meaning if you've got it, you generally won't get to trial. Like with the Arizona Cardinals girl,
right?
Because he had the video, the cops look at it, and the cops aren't concerned with evidence rules, which, by the way, are completely arcane, totally old, very weird, generally not all that useful, and most lawyers don't know their eyeball from their elbow about real evidence and how to introduce it. So all the other side has to do is object to it, and the judge is usually going to just uphold the objection because the other side doesn't know how to defend it. But my point is, if you have the video evidence, you usually will be able to get the police officers to make the right call at that point, like they did in Arizona.
Yeah, right.
Or if you've got something, when you get to the district attorney level, your lawyer can use that and explain to the DA, listen, you got a real problem here because, A, it's going to be a real miscarriage of justice if you move forward based on this video evidence. Whether or not it gets in, we'll deal with that at trial level. But by having it, you've got a good shot at least getting the charges dismissed. And you might be able to blow the other side out of the water by having something. That's where it's really useful.
Right. So, like, basically anybody in this country, in the U.S., any man, let's say any young male college student, the best advice, no matter what the laws are regarding recordings, surreptitiously or otherwise, is to a good piece of advice would to always have some kind of personal recording device on you. And if you're in a situation where, like, even if you're just having casual sex with somebody, might not be a bad idea to have something recording. Whereas, like, maybe 10, 15 years ago, it would have been outrageous to suggest that to any man. Now it's a good idea. Do you agree that it's a pretty good idea to have something on you all the time, to have any man at this stage? Because we've seen what's going on, especially in college campuses, with the whole Title IX hysteria thing going on. It's terrible what's happening to young men now in college campuses.
It's horrific, and the answer is yes. I do think that you really do need to protect yourself and have something, whether it's a video, whether it was that Good to Go app, whether there's something to back up your side of the story, particularly if you're going to be on a college campus, because college kids are in for a world of hurt. You know, we've got this whole new law in California that's going to go national over the next probably year, 18 months, as they start pushing it through, where you've got to have continuing consent for sexual activity
the entire time you're having
all
sex.
Stages.
And again, we have this thing where it's absolutely impossible to prove that you actually did this, that you achieved this consent throughout the entire stage. So anybody can make this accusation. It's absolutely absurd.
I mean,
what girl says yes, yes, yes all the time when you're having sex with her? What guy asks all the time? Is like every 30 seconds. Is this okay?
Right.
Yeah. Is this okay? Yes,
I mean, talk about a mood killer.
Yeah, for real. I mean, what girl will be interested in a guy that's constantly asking, "Hey, are you still okay with this?" You know, it's
None.
yeah,
I'm
right.
guessing.
Yeah, right. It's like what you know. It doesn't make any logical sense when you think about it.
Right.
But that's just the thing. It seems to me that the people who are behind these reforms know they know that it's absurd. It's not like that they're mentally deficient in this regard. In a very
No,
cynical way, they're
I know.
using this
Hold
to do
on.
a couple things:
I
raise
want to
more
take.
money.
I want to take issue with you on that one because I really do think that they are mentally deficient in this, and I think,
Okay, okay. Some are, some aren't. But go ahead and
but I'm coming at it from this perspective. I don't mean that they're stupid. I mean that they're like emotionally stunted when it comes to this because they're generally people that have been victimized and hurt themselves, and they're acting out of their own hurt and trying to overreact and overprotect everybody else. They're not coming at this from the perspective of a sane, whole, healthy person. They're coming at this from the perspective of somebody who has been hurt,
damage.
abused, and they're
Right.
still wounded. That's
Right.
my, and I get it.
Those are the people who should not be in charge of the decision making process as far as legal statutes are concerned.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
here's the thing. I see when I think about the bigger picture, and I'm not saying that you're not capable of thinking about the bigger picture. I see a lot of people who are more interested in money and political power, who are using these people, these mentally deficient people, these people who've been damaged, and also using this natural tendency that men in society at large have to want to protect women to garner more political power and more money for themselves. I see a bigger thing here in this whole thing. Tell me what you think about that. Because there's no doubt there's lots of money in the whole sexual grievance industry. We're talking
There's
billions of
huge
dollars.
money all
And
around.
more than just money, it's this idea when you can take away due process, that's power. That's
Yeah, absolutely.
unbelievable power. And
And,
I
and,
see a
and
lot of cynical politicians out there, and I'm going to say it right now, Hillary Clinton's one of them, who I believe, really, really, really keen on this idea of, hey, you can do away with this whole nuisance of due process and whatever. We
right.
can have all the power we want. But
Yeah.
I mean, some people say that I would be paranoid in saying that, but from what I've seen, I don't think it's paranoid at all to say that there's people out there who are um, they're totally down with this whole cynical use of male
Right.
ability and this the damsel in distress syndrome to garner political power and get money for themselves. So I
It's
think there's
absolutely. I mean, I see that all the time. It happens in the domestic violence shelters.
oh
You know,
yeah, well yeah,
you know
absolutely.
the more patients they have, the more women they have coming in claiming they're abused, the more money they're going to get. You know,
Right, yeah,
last
they
year,
want to increase the
$36 million was spent in California, and none of it basically went for men.
right, and not much of it went to actually helping women either. That's the thing about
Right.
domestic violence shelters, and we've shown this several times. The entire domestic violence industry is doing nothing but collecting a lot of money, and they're not really helping anybody with it. They're just stacking it, making interest, and collecting for a small number of individuals some very big salaries.
Absolutely.
It's just happening all around, and people do not see this happening.
Well, they don't see it, and there's not a lot of publicity about it
No.
because all you really see is every 17 seconds a woman is
Yeah.
abused.
Right. Well, that makes that kind
3 women a day are murdered by their intimate partners.
yeah
And
that makes
it was
bigger
interesting.
headlines
Last
than
night I was at a dinner party, and there was 7 people around the table, and I said, 3 women a day are supposedly killed by intimate partners. Does anybody at this table know anybody that was ever killed by someone they were dating? And 7 people, that's going to be a
yeah.
pretty big pool when you add in
Sure.
all the social
Absolutely. Yeah.
network. Not one.
Not one. Okay. No. Absolutely. Yeah. I remember I was interviewed by Al Jazeera last year, and they said they pulled out the same thing. Oh, every day, 3 women are killed by their domestic by their former partners. Now, what I didn't do is I didn't ask how many men are killed every week from their former partners. But
Well, let's
but
talk about
but I
Daniel Crespo if you want to talk about men who get killed.
yeah, right. What I said was this is a nation of 375 million people. What does that mean?
Right.
What does that mean? Does that mean that this is a huge problem? No. More people are killed by gun violence. Way more people are killed by car accidents. More people are, like 20 more times more people are killed by household accidents, slipping on a piece of ice on your front porch. It's not something that why aren't we spending $1 billion a year, as the Violence Against Women Act is doing, on household accidents? We're not doing it. Why?
No.
Because really, statistically, it's pretty insignificant.
Well, it's that, but it's also it doesn't have. There's no face attached to it.
Right, yeah.
There's no movie. Gone Girl, great movie.
Sure.
Ben Affleck did a fabulous job. Everybody was an excellent acting job. Most people don't really see that as a domestic violence movie.
But that's what it is.
Completely.
I never saw the movie.
Oh, you totally need to see this movie.
Cool.
Because the acting
I've
really
been told
superb.
it was like, a men's rights activist dream movie, But
Pretty much. I mean, it just showed everything that happens in these sick, twisted relationships that, lawyers like me deal with on a regular basis. But when you talk about numbers, I was just listening to Freakonomics podcast, and they were talking about the perfect crime. And the perfect crime, if you want to kill somebody, is kill them out if they are a pedestrian by a car in New York, because you have almost zero chance of getting A, caught, and B, even if you are caught, being prosecuted.
Right.
They had like 14,000 people a year get killed by cars as pedestrians in New York.
In New York, right? Yeah.
Of which 66 got prosecuted.
Wow,
I mean, it was off the charts. You're like, what? Really? How'd that happen?
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. Nobody wants to take a look at the fact that statistically, domestic violence in the family home is a 50-50 proposition.
Right.
And the people to really blame for that are the women that have pressed the definition of domestic violence from where it used to be a very narrow definition to this super wide Grand Canyon-sized definition of what domestic violence is, and the men just haven't caught up to it yet. They haven't figured out that, oh my God, yes, this is what it really means.
Let's talk. You wanted to talk about a certain case.
I did. Eric Walden was he's an Indianapolis Colts linebacker, and back in March, he came home with his current girlfriend to find his baby mama had broken into his house and came in with a gun, a knife, and a baseball bat. And she attacked him and cut his arm. She attacked the girlfriend with the bat and broke the girlfriend's arm, and was eventually subdued and arrested.
Right.
And what bothers me about that is, A, he's not coming forth and saying, I'm a victim of domestic violence or I'm a survivor, and somebody needs to do something about this, and where's the NFL helping me?
Yeah.
That's not going to happen.
No. Not after. I want to talk about the NFL after you talk about this story, but go ahead, please.
Okay. But, that headline was a headline for about 3 seconds, and then it was gone.
Right.
Because, here, big, tough linebacker gets attacked by his girlfriend. Oh, well, that's no big deal. We're going to just move on.
Yeah,
that, to me, is a prime example of, here's an excellent face. Here's a man who's a role model as an NFL pro player who did exactly what he's supposed to do. He protected one woman. He got attacked by another woman.
And then ended up protecting the woman.
To talk about him as a hero.
Yeah. Right, yeah. Yeah. I'm going to read this story real quick for our audience. Sure. Okay. This is, you sent me the link. This is from the Daily News, New York Daily News. The story is entitled, Ex-Girlfriend Attacks Indianapolis Colts Eric Walden, New Girlfriend with a Gun, Bat, and Knife at Georgia Home, from the cops. An NFL linebacker's unhinged ex-girlfriend lay in wait to attack the Colts player and his new girlfriend, slashing the football player with a knife and smashing his new love interest with a baseball bat during 3 different attacks at the man's Georgia home, police said. Erica Palmer faces several charges for the Sunday afternoon attacks at the Braselton home of 29-year-old Indianapolis Colts player Eric Walden, authorities said. There was a knife involved, there was a gun, At first, when we got there, Assistant Police Chief Lou Solis told WSB-TV. When Walden, who stands 6'2" and weighs 250 pounds, returned home with, of course, they had to put in the stats of his weight as if that matters. Returned home with his girlfriend, he found Palmer, who had already broken into the residence, waiting on a couch with a baseball bat and Walden's gun she'd found in his house, police said. A struggle ensued, and Walden was able to grab the gun from his ex, with whom he has 2 children. But Palmer whipped around the baseball bat, breaking the new girlfriend's arm, cops said, before she fled into the woods with Walden's Rolex watch and iPhone. The injured couple called cops, who came to the home and took a statement before leaving after Walden and his girlfriend said they'd drive to the hospital rather than taking an ambulance. But as they prepared to leave, Palmer again ran up, this time wielding a knife, which she used to slash Walden's arm, cops said. We got there, and of course she had gone again, Solis told WSB-TV. She again fled, but cops were able to track her cell phone to a Gwinnett County hotel. She was busted on more than a dozen charges, including aggravated assault, burglary, and theft, and booked into County Hall Jail. Sorry about that. The contentious couple has a past domestic violence case from 2011 in Wisconsin, when Walden was ordered to complete community service and counseling, WSB reported. Okay, we'll have to talk about that. Walden, an 8-year pro, attended college at Middle Tennessee State and has played for the Kansas City Chiefs, Miami Dolphins, Green Bay Packers, and the Colts. Okay, so here we have the situation where clearly this woman was the perpetrator. Clearly,
Right.
She broke into the guy's house, she stole his gun, she assaulted him with the gun, the knife, and the baseball bat. Okay? Clearly,
Yep.
this woman is the problem. Okay, now they have this supposed history of domestic violence problems between the couple. All right. So something tells me that not only is this woman an extremely violent woman, but that she is also practiced at falsely accusing this guy of domestic violence. If there's been this guy had to go through counseling and whatnot. Obviously, she accused him of domestic violence beforehand.
Yeah, I would
Well,
bet
there's
money
every
that he took the
indication to
fall.
suggest that this guy is not a violent guy. He didn't do anything to hurt this woman, but she's
Right.
clearly. I mean, it's just the entire thing is insane. It's absolutely insane.
It is, but my point is like, where was the headline on that one?
Yeah,
Nobody heard about it.
yeah.
It
No,
was
well, it was
headline
buried.
for about a
Well,
minute,
first of all,
then
no one
gone.
cares about men who are victims of domestic violence. They're often laughed at. They're often seen as people who've done something wrong. They're the
Right. Why couldn't he take a hit from her?
Yeah, or why or not only that, but also you hear this, why doesn't this man keep his woman under check? You hear that a lot.
Right. I mean, that's the other one. It's like, okay,
Or
you're supposed to
what did
control the
this guy
woman,
do?
but if you control her too much, then you're an abuser. Well, what
Right.
the
Well, yeah.
are you guys talking about?
Well, it's also this idea where you hear this all the time, where it's like there's no reason for a man to hit a woman, none whatsoever. But all of a sudden, when a man gets hit by a woman, it's like, hey, what did this guy do to deserve that? That's
Right.
well, you hear this all the time, in casual
Absolutely.
conversation, and with the NFL, especially what happened last year, I think was totally appalling with the Ray Rice incident. Clearly, you had this couple that was mutually abusive. They were
Which,
both.
by the way, is 50% of all domestic
Oh,
violence.
it's like yeah.
It's bilateral.
Oh, absolutely. It's just and the other 50% where you have
You have people
where
who are
one partner
emotionally
is the one
disturbed.
who's the primary aggressor. It's
Right.
most often the woman and not the man. And this has been proven case. But the thing is, most domestic violence is two people they've been drinking, or there's some drug problem involved, or some mental illness, and it's 50-50. It's both men and women, and it just has nothing to do with sex. And that's what happened with the Ray Rice case. They were both drunk. She had smacked him in the face a couple times. She came at him in the elevator. Before she got to him, he popped her in the face pretty damn hard, I must say, and he knocked her out. And the Here's what happened with that incident. What happened was the feminist establishment, these VAWA people, the VAWA mafia, we like to call them, they descended on the NFL. They used that incident to say the NFL has this huge problem with domestic violence, and this is all. And what they did in the end was they got a handful of misandric ads on the Super Bowl, and they ended up extorting the NFL, the National Organization of Women, ended up extorting the NFL for millions of dollars. And who was helped from this? Certainly not this Eric Walden guy. And I don't think that any female was helped by this either. It's all about money and publicity and getting more money. That's
Absolutely.
that's what I saw what
Yeah.
happened last year.
Totally.
Oh, it was appalling what they did. And in addition to that, what I also saw was there seems to be a growing awareness that this isn't working anymore. I know a
Yeah.
lot of friends of mine who are football fans are saying, you know what, Bob, and they know I'm a men's rights activist. They know what I've done. They said, you know what, Bob, what you've been telling me for the past 6 months, a year, 2 years is absolutely right. These people are ripping us off. This is
Yeah.
nothing more than a scam. They're just ripping off. They're basically ripping off the fans who are paying ad money and paying ticket money and buying jerseys, and they're ruining the game for profit, not because they really want to help anybody, because they're not helping anybody. They're not helping anybody at all. They're helping themselves to money,
Right.
publicity.
Yeah. And to your point about the money, look at what happened with pro soccer
Yeah.
last summer with Hope Solo.
Yep.
Oh, let's see. We've got a woman who attacks her nephew.
Yep.
Where's the outcry there? But there's
Yeah.
no money
There's
with
no
women's
money in it.
soccer.
No money in it.
Nobody cares about women's soccer. It's this
Yeah.
non-sport, right? So that's
Right.
going to get swept under the rug. Nobody cares.
Yeah, and what with and Erin Pizzi, I'm sure you're familiar with her name, Erin Pizzi.
Yeah.
She works for us. She is the woman who single-handedly started the abuse shelter movement in the UK, and she knew from the very beginning that domestic violence was a two-way street. Both men and women were equally violent towards each other, so there should be shelters for both men and women. But what she
Right.
discovered very quickly was that no one wanted to give money for the men's shelters, but they wanted to give a lot of money for the women's shelter. And
Right.
once that happened, these feminists who were not interested in domestic violence, they were, but not to the extent that they were before they saw what Erin Pizzi was doing. When they saw how much money she was making, when they saw how much money that the entire thing could bring in, all of a sudden domestic violence became this huge issue because it was a money-making issue. Not that
Yeah.
they were interested in actually solving any problem, but because they realized then, hey, we got something we can make money from. So we have this thing that is used in a cynical way for people to basically get wealthy off of. And there are a lot of wealthy people in the domestic violence industry. And there's a lot of people who, as you say, these lower level um, social workers and anger management people that are basically dimwits who wouldn't be able to have a job any other way, who, because their numbers are so huge, can actually make a difference when it comes to voting and talking about these issues, even though what they're saying is complete bullshit. So the whole thing is one giant scam. They literally turned
Totally.
and it's not just the domestic violence industry, the sexual grievance industry, the sexual assault deal. They've turned it into
Oh,
one
that's just
huge
we're at the very beginning
financial
stages of that
scam.
nightmare.
Yeah, and it's going to
That's
get
yeah,
worse.
we're at the very
It's going to
beginning
get
of that
worse.
one.
And
Yeah.
they turn it into one giant money making scam. But it's not just money making.
But I mean, and I totally agree with you. But I do want to say this: let's give the devil their due. They managed to see the opportunity. They managed to get people rallied around it, and they
Right.
got it done. And when men can do that around our issues, we will get it done. We can take a look at the basics of breast cancer versus prostate cancer. 1 in 8 women, 12%.
Uh-huh.
1 in 6 men. 1 in 6 men will have
Right.
prostate cancer. When was the last time you saw anything painted blue?
Nothing.
Not a single dime. Nobody talks about
There's
it.
also
Didn't happen.
there's the Movember campaign, which has been wildly successful. Really is a marvelous organization which has been wildly successful in getting lots of money saved up. for men's health issues.
Nowhere near what Susan G. Komen does.
Nowhere
Near the corporate buy-ins.
But look at these guys, these November guys. Every November, this campaign comes under attack by feminists. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, guys, these guys really think that men's health issues are even approaching as important as women's health issues. And it's like, well, excuse me, they are, because men are human beings too, and they have their own specific health problems, which are numerous.
And when we get our act together and start raising awareness, we will be just as successful, if not more so. And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, but don't you think the fight's going to be harder?
How much money do I make as a divorce lawyer? And I could make far more representing women.
Oh, sure.
3 times as much money representing women.
That's the problem, though, isn't it? There's not as much money in it, and that's going to make it that much harder for these issues to be championed. I remember, I am just going to share an anecdote. I'm going to try not to talk too much, but I remember I met this girl at a bar several months ago, and she decided to get into family law. And the reason she decided to get into family law, she said, I decided to get into family law because my parents got divorced and my dad got screwed. I didn't see my dad for a couple of years. My mom, she held all the cards in the deck, and I got into family law thinking that we need to change this system and I need to represent men and all this. And right when I was about to say, oh, well, that's great. Yeah, I'm a men's rights activist, and I deal with fathers' rights and stuff like that. Right when I was about to say that, she said, she continued and said, but then I saw all the money that could be made from this family law system, and I just forgot all about that. So now I'm making like $150,000 a year, and I'm only 2 years out of law school. She actually said that to me. Yeah. She actually said that to me. So the question is how do you? It's easy to say when men get their shit together and do all this, but it's we're up against so much more. We're up against basic human greed and the thirst for power, and the desire to use basic, some would say, innocent human proclivities that have been with us since time immemorial, like male disposability and the need to protect the female gender because of the childbearing gender. We're up against all this stuff. How are we going to get around that?
Really easily. We're going to use their own arguments against them.
Okay.
It's all about equality. Right. Women are just as equal as men. They can earn just as much money. They can do the same jobs. A woman who focuses on her career makes just as much money as a man who focuses on his. Sure. Don't give me that 77 cents on the dollar BS, because I'm not buying it.
Yeah, right, sure.
And when we start using their arguments against them, just like I did earlier where I said, I don't like using the victim word, but I use targets and survivor. There's no such thing as a domestic violence victim anymore. There's a domestic violence survivor. Okay, well, why is that? Well, the theory was we're going to empower the women. Okay, great. But it also is language that we can co-opt and use for our purposes to force our message out there to get men to hear what we have to say.
Right.
I totally agree that we are definitely behind the 8 ball here and that we have definitely set ourselves up, but I also know this about men. If you give them a reason to organize, and if you give them a hill to climb, and if you give them a reward, they will organize, climb the hill, and get the reward. And that's what we need to do.
Great. I think it's 10:16 right now, my time. I think it's been a very productive show. It's been over an hour now. We try to keep things about an hour and a quarter right now without callers. So I want to thank you so much for calling in, and definitely let's keep in touch.
My pleasure. It's been great talking with you.
Yeah, sure. But I'd like to have on the show again some other time. I like to have regular guests back from time to time. So again, thank you so much. And please share the show with everybody that you wish. James, do you have any final words for our audience?
Yes, we do, folks. Take the red pill.